Back in the 1960s, every household had a rotary telephone, usually placed in the kitchen or living room. You'd slide your finger into the numbered holes, turn the dial, and wait for it to spin back before entering the next digit. It was slow but strangely satisfying. Conversations were often short, and if someone else in the house picked up another receiver, you could hear them breathing on the line. There was no caller ID, no voicemail, and certainly no text messages. If you called and the line was busy, all you heard was that steady tone letting you know you'd have to try again later. Families even argued over phone time, especially when teenagers spent hours chatting with friends. It was a shared household tool, and somehow it made every call feel important, as if you were connecting to the outside world in a special way. Television in the 1960s wasn't as simple as pressing a button on a remote. Sets were bulky, with rabbit ear antennas sticking up awkwardly. To get a clear picture, someone in the family often had to stand by the set, twisting and turning the antenna until the snow and static disappeared. Sometimes aluminum foil was wrapped around the tips, a little homegrown fix for better reception. With only a handful of channels available, watching TV was an event, not just background noise. Families gathered together in the evening, adjusting the antenna during every commercial break. Kids would even yell from the couch, "It's clear! Don't move!" when the picture finally sharpened. That shared effort made television feel more personal. Shows like Bonanza or The Ed Sullivan Show looked magical on those fuzzy screens because the whole family had worked together to make them come alive. In many neighborhoods, the clinking sound of glass bottles in the early morning meant the milkman had arrived. He delivered fresh milk right to your doorstep, often leaving bottles in a metal or wooden box by the front door. Families counted on him for not just milk, but also cream, butter, and sometimes eggs. Kids would rush outside to grab the bottles before the sun warmed them, and moms often left payment tucked in a small envelope or written on the order slip. There was something comforting about knowing food was brought directly to your home, and it gave a personal touch to daily life. The glass bottles were washed and reused, so nothing felt wasted. It was part of a rhythm of life that disappeared as supermarkets and plastic containers slowly replaced the friendly neighborhood milkman. Music in the 1960s spun out of record players, often big wooden consoles that doubled as furniture. Teenagers stacked several vinyl records on the spindle, letting them drop one by one as the needle glided across the grooves. The soft crackle before the song began was almost as memorable as the music itself. Friends gathered around to listen to the latest hits from the Beatles, the Supremes, or the Rolling Stones, and those records were passed from hand to hand like treasures. Families also used them during holidays, filling the room with Christmas carols or big band music. There was no skipping ahead, no playlist to shuffle through. You listened to every track in order, giving each song its time to breathe. Those record players made music a shared, physical experience, something you could touch, hear, and feel in the air. Back then, families didn't just throw clothes away when they tore. Every home had a sewing kit, often kept in a cookie tin or a little wooden box. Moms and grandmothers sat by the window in the evening, darning socks, patching knees, and sewing loose buttons back into place. Kids learned basic stitching at an early age so they could fix their own school uniforms or play clothes. It wasn't just about saving money, it was about valuing what you had. Fabric scraps were reused for quilts or doll dresses, and nothing was wasted. Sitting quietly with needle and thread, creating tiny, neat stitches, felt almost like meditation. In those moments, you didn't just repair clothing, you preserved memories and extended the life of something familiar. It was a skill every family respected and relied on, woven into the rhythm of everyday living. In the 1960s, smoking was so common that ashtrays seemed to be everywhere. Every coffee table had one, often made of heavy glass or bright ceramic. Some were even decorative, shaped like leaves, animals, or geometric designs. Guests would light up without asking, and the ashtray was always within reach. The smell of smoke mixed with the aroma of coffee or dinner, and nobody thought twice about it. Even offices, airplanes, and restaurants had ashtrays built into the furniture. For many, cleaning out the ashtray was just part of household chores, like dusting or vacuuming. Looking back, it's surprising how normal it all felt. Those little trays, once a symbol of hospitality, now feel like artifacts from another world. A reminder of just how much everyday habits have changed over the decades. Before modern plastic trays and automatic ice makers, families relied on heavy aluminum ice cube trays with a lever down the middle. You filled them with water, slid them into the freezer, and waited. When the cubes were ready, you yanked the handle upward, cracking the frozen water free with a loud snap. Sometimes the cube stuck, and you had to wrestle with the tray, sending shards of ice flying across the kitchen counter. Kids loved grabbing the first cold cube to drop into a glass of lemonade or soda. The clinking sound of those cubes was refreshing on a hot summer day. They weren't convenient by today's standards, but there was a kind of charm in the ritual, waiting, cracking, and finally enjoying those hard-earned cubes of ice. Televisions in the 1960s weren't just screens, they were pieces of furniture. Big wooden consoles sat proudly in living rooms, polished and shiny like cabinets. Families arranged their chairs around them as if they were a fireplace, because in many ways they were the new hearth of the home. Kids sat cross-legged on the rug while parents relaxed on the couch, all watching together. Changing the channel meant getting up and turning a knob, and volume adjustments required the same effort. Saturday nights might mean The Lawrence Welk Show, while Sunday afternoons brought sports or westerns. The set itself, with its glowing tube, filled the room with a soft warmth. Owning a console television wasn't just about watching shows. It was about having a centerpiece that shaped family time, laughter, and memories. Family memories in the 1960s were often captured with Polaroid cameras, which felt almost magical at the time. You snapped a picture, pulled out the photo, and waited impatiently as the image slowly appeared. People would huddle around, waving the paper in the air as if that would speed it up. The black and white snapshots were often slightly blurry, but they carried a charm all their own. Birthdays, picnics, and everyday moments were saved in stacks of instant prints, tucked into shoeboxes or glued into albums. Kids loved seeing themselves appear on paper just minutes after the shutter clicked. Unlike today's endless digital photos, each Polaroid felt rare and valuable. Those grainy images told the real story of a family's life, imperfect but beautiful. Classrooms in the 1960s were ruled by giant green or black chalkboards stretching across the front wall. Teachers wrote out lessons in white chalk, the sound of squeaking filling the air. Kids sat in neat rows, copying notes into their notebooks. At the end of the day, someone was always chosen to clap the dusty erasers together outside, sending white clouds drifting into the air. It felt like a reward, even though it left your hands coated in chalk. Sometimes doodles were left behind on the corners of the board, little drawings, initials, or jokes. There were no smart boards, no projectors, and no digital screens, just chalk, dust, and careful handwriting. The chalkboard was the heart of learning, a place where every math problem, spelling list, and history lesson appeared and disappeared with the swipe of a felt eraser. Bringing your lunch to school in the 1960s wasn't just practical, it was a chance to show off your personality. Kids carried brightly painted metal lunchboxes featuring popular TV characters, superheroes, or cartoons. Some had Mickey Mouse, others the Jetsons or the Lone Ranger. The clink of the metal handle was instantly recognizable in a crowded hallway. Inside, moms packed peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, an apple, maybe a Twinkie, and a small thermos of milk. Sitting in the cafeteria, kids compared designs, trading bites of food or cookies. Lunchboxes often got dented and scratched, but that only made them feel more personal. Opening one up was like lifting the lid on a little piece of home. They weren't just containers for food, they were badges of childhood pride, each box carrying both lunch and a bit of identity. Every classroom had that loud metal pencil sharpener bolted to the wall. Kids lined up to twist their wooden pencils inside, turning the crank until the shavings curled neatly into the little compartment. The smell of fresh cedar shavings filled the air, sharp, clean, and strangely comforting. Sometimes pencils broke, forcing kids to start over, while others loved the excuse to get out of their seats. Teachers often grew annoyed at the constant grinding sound, but for students it was almost a ritual. Walking back to your desk with a perfectly sharp pencil felt like carrying a brand new tool, ready for spelling tests or math problems. It was one of those tiny, everyday school details that stays with you, even decades later, because it made learning feel tactile and real. Every day at recess, kids lined up for their small cartons of milk. They were usually white for plain milk or light pink for strawberry. Opening them wasn't always easy. You had to pinch and pull just right, or else the top tore unevenly. Kids sat on the playground steps sipping their milk while chatting with friends. Sometimes teachers insisted you finish the whole carton before going back to play, even if it had warmed in the sun. On special days, chocolate milk appeared, and it felt like winning a prize. Empty cartons were often crushed and tossed into wire trash bins, where they became props in silly games. That daily ritual of milk at recess was simple but unforgettable, a shared moment that connected an entire generation of schoolchildren. Before computers and tablets, writing neatly by hand was considered an important skill. In the 1960s, kids spent hours practicing penmanship, filling lined paper with rows of loops and curves. Teachers walked the aisles, correcting slants and spacing. Some schools even required fountain pens with little ink cartridges that sometimes leaked. Blue ink smudged across fingers and desks, leaving permanent stains on clothes. Despite the mess, there was pride in learning to write beautifully, to form each letter with care. Parents saved those practice sheets, showing how a child's handwriting improved over time. Writing wasn't just about words, it was about discipline and presentation. Even the act of signing your name carried a sense of importance. The overhead projector was a classroom marvel in the 1960s. Teachers placed clear sheets with words or diagrams on the flat glass, and the machine cast a bright, enlarged image onto the wall. The hum of the fan and the warmth of the light filled the room as students watched. Sometimes shadows of the teacher's hand or ruler danced across the screen, adding a human touch to the lesson. Kids were fascinated by the technology, even though it seems simple now. When the projector squeaked or the bulb flickered, the whole class groaned. Yet, for many students, it made lessons feel alive, bigger than the page in front of them. It was one of the first steps toward visual learning, sparking curiosity and excitement in classrooms that otherwise relied only on chalk and textbooks. Playgrounds in the 1960s had equipment that would be considered dangerous today, but at the time, they were pure joy. The metal merry-go-round spun fast as kids ran alongside, then jumped on, clinging tightly as it whirled. Seesaws bounced up and down, sometimes launching a friend off the end if one side hit the ground too hard. Slides were tall, steep, and made of hot metal in the summer. Despite the bumps and bruises, kids loved every minute. Recess was noisy, filled with laughter, squeals, and shouts of faster, higher. There were no safety mats, just hard dirt or gravel beneath. Yet those playgrounds taught courage, balance, and the thrill of risk. Looking back, they were places where friendships were formed, energy was released, and childhood felt free. Outside of school, sidewalks became playgrounds of their own. Kids threw hopscotch grids with chalk, hopping on one foot while tossing small stones as markers. Jump rope games filled the air with chants and rhymes, Cinderella dressed in yellow, or Down by the river. Girls twirled double dutch ropes while boys showed off their skipping speed. The pavement was alive with activity, laughter echoing through neighborhoods. There were no fancy sports programs or organized clubs needed, just chalk, rope, and imagination. When the streetlights flickered on, kids knew it was time to head home. Those simple sidewalk games were more than entertainment. They built community, taught rhythm, and created memories that still feel bright decades later. Baseball cards were like treasure in the 1960s. Kids carried stacks held together with rubber bands, flipping through them at recess or after school. The thrill was in the trade, offering two commons for one favorite player, or gambling with flipping games to win a card. Some kids chewed the brittle gum that came inside the packs, while others just wanted the cards themselves. Shoeboxes under beds held entire collections, with star players like Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays treated like gold. At the time, no one thought about future value. It was about the fun of the swap, the joy of holding a piece of the game in your hand. Trading cards wasn't just a hobby. It was a language of childhood friendship, competition, and pride. Comic books were another childhood treasure. For a dime or a quarter, kids could buy colorful adventures starring Superman, Batman, or Archie and his gang. Pages smelled of cheap ink and paper, and kids read them until the covers wore thin. Comics were traded, swapped, or secretly read under desks during class. Teachers sometimes disapproved, but for children, they were pure magic. Worlds of heroes, villains, and endless excitement. Some kids even dreamed of drawing their own, copying panels into notebooks. Carrying a few comics in your backpack meant you always had an escape ready. They weren't just stories, they were friends, companions, and gateways to imagination. Looking back, those thin little books carried entire childhoods within their pages, sparking dreams that outlasted the paper itself. Every diner in the 1960s seemed to glow with the neon light of a jukebox. For a dime or a quarter, you could flip through rows of songs, each listed on little cards behind glass. The satisfying click of the buttons was followed by the mechanical shuffle of records inside. Then the music would pour out, Elvis Presley, the Supremes, or Frankie Valli filling the room. Teenagers crowded into booths, sharing fries and sodas while picking songs to set the mood. Sometimes couples even argued about which track to play next. The jukebox wasn't just a machine, it was the heartbeat of the diner, connecting people through music and atmosphere. That glowing cabinet with spinning records turned ordinary meals into little moments of celebration. A summer evening in the 1960s often meant piling into the family car for a night at the drive-in. Parents packed snacks while kids wore pajamas, ready to fall asleep in the back seat. You parked facing the giant outdoor screen, hooked a crackling metal speaker onto your window, and waited as the movie flickered to life. The air smelled of popcorn and fresh-cut grass, while fireflies darted around the cars. Couples sat close, teenagers whispered in the back seats, and families shared blankets against the cool night air. Watching movies under the stars was magical, a mix of community and privacy. Unlike modern theaters, the drive-in was an experience as much as entertainment. It made the movie feel bigger, brighter, and part of the summer sky itself. Teenagers in the 1960s found freedom on the dance floor. Sock hops were held in school gyms, with polished wood floors and records spinning on a turntable. Shoes were often left at the door to keep the floor smooth, which is how the dances got their name. Boys in collared shirts and girls in poodle skirts or dresses twirled under colorful streamers. The music was loud, lively, and full of rhythm, from doo-wop harmonies to the early rock and roll beats. Dance halls and towns also hosted weekend events, where bands played live and young people gathered to show off their moves. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about feeling the music, laughing with friends, and sharing the joy of movement. Those dances captured the spirit of youth, freedom, and excitement in a way that still lingers in memory. On weekends, roller rinks were packed with kids and teens lacing up their skates. The smooth wooden floors echoed with the sound of rolling wheels, while an organ played cheerful tunes from a booth above. Bright lights spun across the rink, and friends skated hand in hand, circling endlessly. Beginners clung to the railings, while skilled skaters twirled or raced ahead. Some rinks even hosted couples skate, where the lights dimmed and pairs held hands as slow songs played. The rink snack bar served sodas and candy, making breaks just as fun as the skating itself. For many, roller rinks were places of first crushes, laughter, and freedom. They were safe spaces where fun felt endless, where Saturday nights stretched long with music, motion, and joy on wheels. Teenagers in the 1960s filled their bedrooms with magazines like Tiger Beat, plastering pin-up posters of favorite singers and actors across the walls. Paul Anka, Annette Funicello, and Elvis were regular faces, smiling from glossy pages. Girls cut out articles on beauty tips, while boys flipped through sports heroes or car ads. Magazines became personal scrapbooks, taped and pinned to mirrors or notebooks. Posters were more than decorations. They were companions, silent reminders of dreams, idols, and growing independence. Bedrooms turned into personal sanctuaries, with walls reflecting music tastes and favorite stars. Long before social media or digital fandom, these magazines connected teens to a world larger than their hometowns, feeding their imaginations with glamour, style, and possibility. Walking into a record store in the 1960s was like stepping into a temple of sound. Rows of vinyl albums filled the shelves, their colorful covers drawing you in. The real thrill came from the listening booths, small cubicles where you could sample records before buying. Friends squeezed inside, headphones too large for their heads as they listened to the latest hits. Choosing a new record wasn't just a purchase, it was a decision that mattered, something you'd play over and over at home. Clerks knew their music and often gave recommendations, creating conversations that stretched for hours. Record stores weren't just shops, they were gathering places for music lovers, where each album carried the promise of discovery. For kids, Saturday mornings were the highlight of the week. You'd roll out of bed early, grab a bowl of cereal, and plop down in front of the TV in your pajamas. The air was filled with the cheerful voices of cartoon characters, Bugs Bunny, the Flintstones, or Rocky and Bullwinkle. Parents often let kids watch for hours, giving them a rare break from chores. Commercials for toys and sugary cereals were just as exciting as the shows. The living room filled with laughter and the glow of cartoons, while siblings argued over which program to watch. It was a simple ritual that made weekends magical. Those Saturday mornings gave children a world of color, humor, and imagination that lasted long after the TV was turned off. Hobbies in the 1960s often had a slower rhythm, and collecting stamps or coins was a favorite pastime. Kids carefully saved envelopes with colorful stamps from faraway countries, soaking them off paper to add into albums. Others searched through spare change, hoping to find rare coins or unusual designs. It was quiet, patient work, but it sparked curiosity about geography, history, and culture. Collections were shared with friends, traded at school, or proudly shown to parents. Unlike today's fast hobbies, these collections built over years, becoming keepsakes that grew with the child. Stamps and coins weren't just objects, they were tiny windows into the wider world, connecting small-town kids to places and stories far beyond their own. Before video games, board games brought families and friends together around the table. Candyland, Clue, Monopoly, and Sorry were household staples. On rainy afternoons or quiet evenings, kids spread the boards out on the floor, rolling dice and moving colorful pieces along the tracks. Arguments broke out over rules, laughter filled the room when someone got stuck, and victories felt larger than life. Parents often joined in, making it a true family activity. The games were simple but endlessly replayable, teaching patience, strategy, and sportsmanship. They didn't need screens or batteries, just a board, some tokens, and the people around you. Those games created memories of togetherness that stretched far beyond the last roll of the dice. In the 1960s, letter writing was more than communication, it was an art. Kids wrote to pen pals across the country, or even overseas, carefully choosing words and decorating envelopes. Teenagers exchanged handwritten notes, folded neatly into squares, passed secretly in classrooms. Long-distance friends or relatives waited eagerly for mail, cherishing every word. Stationery stores sold colorful paper, stickers, and stamps, making letters feel special before they were even read. The sound of the mailbox lid closing or the sight of the postman on the street brought excitement. Unlike instant messages today, letters carried weight because they took time, effort, and care. Every envelope was a small gift full of personal thought. Writing letters taught patience, gratitude, and connection in a way that feels almost forgotten now.